Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming along to this session. My name is Savit, and I'm director of the Natural History Consortium, which, as you've probably heard over the last couple of days, is the collection of organisations you see here who work together on projects like Communicate. Now, if you were in the partnership session yesterday, you'll have heard me say a little bit about this, so bear with me. But one of the things that we're often asked is where the content for Communicate comes from each year. You might have noticed if you've been coming, we don't have kind of proposals that people send in. We don't do pitches. We don't do auditions for speakers. But we think really hard over a course of a number of months about the shape of the 2 days and the speakers we have. And one of the most important tools we have for that are some gatherings we have across the country where we bring people together and we give them a great lunch and we ask them, what's coming across your desk? What are you reading on social media? What are your colleagues talking about? What's in the news? What does this community need to be talking about? And they're always really, really fascinating sessions. People who come along to those can't even always come along to the conference because sometimes we're sold out too quickly. But if you're interested in coming to one of those lunches in different places in the country, do let us know and we'll put you on the invite list to help plan 2020. But so many ideas, as you can imagine, if we run 4 or 5 sessions across the country, so many ideas emerge. And we can't always fit them into 2 days. And we don't want to make it longer because we know what a stretch it is getting out of the office for even 2 days. And some of you are here for 1 day. And sometimes a topic seems so big, it spins out into its own mini Communicate or series. So the very first one we did was behavior science. And if you were here yesterday, you know we had a masterclass. It's a topic that keeps coming up. And a couple of years ago, there was one topic that seemed just absolutely everywhere, and we decided to have an entire day on it. And we ran an event called Beyond Plastics that was looking at that plastics moment that was already starting to end. This is a couple of years ago. And we asked one of our longtime Communicate friends and someone who's been on the committee from the very beginning, Tim Scoons, who's going to be our first speaker, to share that event and then to bring some of the learning into Communicate. And now that it's been a couple of years, we wanted to bring back some of those themes. And just look at kind of what's happened over the last couple of years and to look forward. Now, this title of the session is a little bit misleading, and I hope I'll be interested to see what you think at the end. And I almost want to change the slide, I haven't done it, to say the next plastics moment question mark, or the next plastic moment, doesn't just cross it out. Because we're not going to spend the next hour talking about plastics, and we're not going to try to guess or even make a prediction on what's our next kind of blue planet moment for food or farming or flying. Because we could all have a completely different answer to that question. And instead, we want to look at some of the more principles or higher level thinking behind that and just think a bit backwards, last couple of years. And in the second half of the session, we're going to look forward as well. And our 2 speakers have taken on the challenge of helping us think about some of those things. So that's enough of an introduction from me. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Tim Scoons to the stage, who's often up here chairing either the whole conference or other session. So it's great to ask you here as a speaker, Tim, to come up on stage.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be back. So yes, thank you for debunking the title, because I always feel a bit embarrassed as being invited to say something and then the first thing I do is debunk the title. That's what we mean, don't we? That's the image we have in our heads about this sort of plastic moment, as Savita said, Blue Planet 2, suddenly everything seemed to be happening, but actually what was that? What was that plastic moment, and was it what history has written it to be? Because if you ask many people, they'll say, David Attenborough did a series on telly, and there was a plastic bag floating around, and there was a whale eating a blue plastic bucket, and everyone got really cross and then stopped using single-use plastics, right? That's very common, how people will see it. And that's great, and David Attenborough himself is rather embarrassed by this, because he realizes that, of course, this was a moment. So the moment bit I'll keep. This was a moment. It was a tipping point moment. It was a moment of realization. It was a mass moment, which I think is what was quite key. But there had been an enormous amount of work done by brilliant people like Natalie Fee, doing City to Sea, who's from this very town. We had A Plastic Ocean, which was a feature doc, which really dealt with it. And actually, if you look at what happened in Blue Planet 2, it was just a few sequences. But what was really interesting is Attenborough had never done that before. And James Honeybourne, the executive producer of Blue Planet 2, is the first person I know who's ever managed to put a piece of trash into the very middle of a beautiful landmark BBC multinational production. So good for him. So why am I explaining this? So I obsess myself in this interface that we've been talking about a lot over the last couple of days, which is the interface between awareness and action. Because awareness on its own, raising awareness on its own, as far as I'm concerned, is potentially a waste of time, a waste of airtime, a waste of attention, if it doesn't actually lead to lasting, meaningful environmental action, be that personal, systemic, or legislative. So, and how have I obsessed in that? Well, I spent 25 years making wildlife documentaries, stuff like Blue Planet initially. I then set up and then ran Spring Watch, Winter Watch, Autumn Watch, anything you want to watch except crime on the BBC. And particularly when I'm a conservationist, by the way, as a starting point. I went into the media because I wanted to make a difference, and I thought that was a way that I could really help shift attitudes and make change. And on Spring Watch, I got close, right? I could do a certain amount, being a BBC person, because I had to be impartial, couldn't be political, couldn't campaign. And I hope you would agree with me to say that Springwatch did kind of change the dial in terms of the dialogue around conservation in this country, at least. But I left the BBC 2.5 years ago. Springwatch is still running, very proud of it, because I wanted to get closer to the action, and I personally wanted to see more impact and more outcome from the noises I had now learnt to make. So this is me now on the other side of the school gates looking back in, but actually suddenly being able to campaign, which I never was able to do before. I had to be the grey man from the BBC. Chris Packham could campaign, but I was the full guy next to him. And my social media feed for the first 10 years of social media was one of the most boring social media feeds you've ever seen. And that was deliberate. It isn't anymore. So what do we mean? So yes, there was a response. Yes? People did respond, and this has been rolling around all over the world. Whether that's attributable to Blue Planet 2 or not, let's not get into it. The point is, it did do something pretty big in this country, but I just want to point out, before we congratulate ourselves on that, has it solved some of the systemic problems? Like, does Indonesia now have its own waste disposal system funded by government? No, it doesn't. So I'm afraid just being clever about your cling film and using beeswax is not going to stop this, all right? So we've got to be careful that these moments, we don't get too obsessed by them. But then again, the next plastic moment, I would argue, I think the tide has turned, and I think now we can expect to have lots of moments. And my challenge to you, and I challenged myself 2 years ago, was, are we ready? Right? Because the next bit's up to us. So you will see that what I did is I stopped making waves and I started making surfboards. And it was just like a good surf. It's about looking for the next wave as it comes down, because there are lots of them. And what's amazing now, and can be quite frightening now, is that ideas can travel and grow very, very fast. And the simpler they are, and the more they tap into something underlying, like the plastics thing, because everyone kind of knew, but they were in denial, the quicker it'll go. And there are moments happening all the time. This is a moment. If you're in Australia, this is a really big moment. Sydney's on the edge of burning. This is really serious. Then there's that moment, right? These are all different moments, but these are all moments that have happened in the last 2 years, right? And they do have direct impacts. I'm proud to say that's my daughter on the first climate strike in Bristol, and she even made it on the news. So, proud dad moment. We have this kind of moment, Extinction Rebellion. This lot from Bristol, by the way, the Red Brigade originally. So beautiful visuals, very nice visuals, but sorry guys, I have an issue with Extinction Rebellion. I don't think they've followed through. They know that they've made a big noise, but have they planned how to turn that into meaningful change? No, they haven't. And this will be the test for XR right now. Can they quickly grow up and get involved? And just going, we're just going to take the whole system down. I'm afraid we've only got 12 years, right? That's quite a quick way of taking a system down. So sorry, but the really practical thing is this is where change happens. This is where lasting, meaningful change happens in this country, right? If you want bankable change, get something legislated. Change the law, right? Change the way things are expected. And that works for personal change as well as systemic change. So I set about saying to myself, I'm going to make media. I'm now a freelance consultant. I work with a range of NGOs. And my job now is to complete that journey of learning I know how to make a big noise. I know how to make a big noise and get people engaged, through Springwatch and everything, a bit of personal behavior change and all of that. But how can I now take that and keep it going, get on that surfboard and deliver genuine, lasting outcomes? And anyone who works with me now, and by the way, I'm going to deconstruct a campaign I devised and ran that was actually also around Blue Planet 2. And it's the plastics moment that isn't about plastics that you might not even know about, but that has now delivered, okay? And how did that happen? To speak to that idea of, are we ready? How are we going to respond to the next wave? Because it will happen. And I've boiled it down to being incredibly boring and logical about how to go about this and how to think about this from the start. I'm only interested in conservation outcomes now from what I do. Having grown up, having outcomes or KPIs, performance indicators that were media ones. How big was your audience? How many people did you reach? You want a big number? Go for Facebook reach. It always has 3 more noughts on it than reality suggests. And you can pat yourselves on the back and go, brilliant, right? And, I've won an Emmy, I've won 2 BAFTAs for making big noises. But have I actually achieved anything? I have no idea. Some people probably feel much better about nature. Maybe I've inspired a couple of David Attenboroughs. Fabulous, but I will never know. Nowadays, everything I do is about which audience am I trying to reach? What action will the media I put in front of them engender? And how does that action deliver the outcome? And none of the KPIs, the success measures of anything we do now has anything to do with media. All of the measures are conservation measures. So one of the outfits I work with is the very brilliant Blue Marine Foundation, a bunch of mavericks, philanthropy funded, just go and get things done. Very cool. And I do media stuff for them. So what happened around Blue Planet 2 that wasn't the plastics moment? Well, we came up with this campaign, which you may or may not have come across, right? Back the Blue Belt. It's a hashtag. That was the look. So how was it that this campaign that essentially came out of nowhere started getting the backing of some of the biggest beasts in the legislative jungle, including almost forcing them into the most ridiculous photo opportunities like that. I took that picture. That's Emily Thornberry kind of posing with a penguin with our brand, right? These are big beasts, right? So how is it that we were able to get everybody wanting to be part of this campaign rather than just being the people we had to try and win over? Well, it started with a very brilliant idea, which is not my idea, and it came from a big coalition of NGOs. The idea of the blue belt, like a green belt around cities, is to take the British overseas territories, which frankly is a quirky, slightly embarrassing after effect of a checkered colonial history, where we've ended up owning these little rocks, if you like, in this case down the mid-Atlantic ridge, absolutely bloody miles away from where we are, but we've got them because no one else wanted them. But what's really interesting is that these rocks in the middle of the mid-Atlantic ridge could be the last areas that don't get overfished because the industrials haven't reached them yet. So these are Edens. So the whole thing has changed. So the idea was to turn the territorial waters of these little rocks into fully protected, marine protected areas. And the only stat I have to put in front of you is if you own a rock the size of a tennis court, right, that stays above water all the time, the international law of the sea says you have legal jurisdiction for 200 nautical miles in every direction. Get that, right? Get that. So that's a lot of real estate, and these are all seamounts. These are all the good bits of the ocean, right? And they sit in a very, very good place because they're out of harm's way. So this was a brilliant idea by the Great British Oceans Coalition, which was this lot, and I was working for Blue Marine. But the big target was how were we going to get the UK government to legislate for this? Because the amazing thing is, being the British overseas territories, it was just up to Britain. We didn't have to ask Europe. We just get a few ministers to legislate, someone to put it into a funding plan, put a bill through, jobs are good. Done. Marine protected areas, bang. And guess what? You add them all up, 4 million square kilometres of new marine protected areas, which, if it all happens, will be the greatest single act of marine conservation ever undertaken by any government ever in history. What a brilliant idea. And guess what? Quite easy to do. People were getting round to this idea, but Brexit was starting and all of that, and no one was listening, and the coalition were like, Tim, no one cares. No one cares. How do we make them care? So I went through a very logical process that says, okay, so the outcome is legislation, right? Legislation and funding. So how do you get legislation and funding? You need to get pressure within Parliament. So what do? You don't do a petition. Petitions don't work anymore. 38 Degrees have killed it because it's too easy. Politicians don't look at them anymore. You make a charter. A charter is a parliamentary instrument that basically says we, the undersigned MPs, have signed up to back this. So the clever people, again, this wasn't me, the lobbyists and everything came up with this parliamentary instrument. There it is, called the Blue Belt Charter. Okay, so now we need to get lots of MPs to get behind this charter, and we set ourselves a target of 100 MPs, because then that's a thing, right? We've got 100 MPs that are going to push this through, and we wanted them cross-party. How do we do that? How do you reach MPs? Where do they form their opinions? Where do they get their information? They get it from Twitter. Don't know if you know that. Westminster runs on Twitter, and yet they use Facebook a bit, but actually the public use Facebook more, but the politicians, they use Twitter. So that was our battleground. So what do? So we waited for the wave to come, right? We knew that there was a moment, it was actually the 10th of December 2017, which was the final episode of Blue Planet 2. It was widely seen as, this is going to be a big one. They're going to drop lots of bombs. Everybody knew that this was going to happen. My experience with Springwatch, I knew what kind of mental, emotional state the audience were going to be in because I'd studied that. How do you create an emotional state and then give them something to do, right? So I knew that at that point, particularly around that final episode on that Sunday night in December, there were going to be a hell of a lot of people who are suddenly going to be caring about places on the other side of the world full of fish, right? Probably the first time they've ever done that. And that's exactly what I wanted them to do, because I wanted them to care about the British overseas territories, and they were going to be outraged at how the human race was not protecting its oceans, and people would also be feeling completely powerless, right? So there's lots of very, very strong emotions there. So because I don't work for the BBC, I could completely and utterly harness that and manipulate people. So what do? We gave them a very, very simple proposition, and it is that. There it is. That was our proposition, right? Simple as that. We started off with really complicated ones, and then we tested it, and actually that is all that matters, because that speaks for itself, right? So just at the point when you're feeling powerless and you're feeling outraged and you're feeling in love with the ocean, we pop up on your social media feed and we go, you want to do that? And people did want to do that. And what do? We made it very easy. So everything we did drove them to that website. There it is. Not very complicated, is it? Not very flashy, but it absolutely does it, right? Very, very simple. If you want to help, if you want to make 4 million square kilometers of new protected ocean, it'll take, look, it only takes a minute. Just enter your postcode below, right? This is easy. You suddenly feel empowered and you have agency. You put your postcode in there, up come the details of your own MP. It tells you whether they've signed the charter or not. They haven't signed the charter. Simple bit of web tech allows you to go straight to their Twitter feed, and it launches your own one, and then you can basically harass your MP on Twitter to sign the charter, because that's all that needed to happen. That's your job. Get your MP to sign the charter. Very, very simple. How did we then get lots of people to harass lots of MPs so that we could do this to get to our 100 MPs? Then we started looking for advocates. So you notice we're working backwards all the time. Backwards, backwards, backwards. And it's all completely boring and logical, right? There's no airy-fairy, oh, we're going to make this lovely thing. I thought we'd make lots of films. Didn't make a single one. Blue Planet 2 did that. We were all about message. So we found advocates all over the place, and we did that, all that stuff you do when you're doing a marketing campaign. We looked at key audiences. We looked at the advocates that they might want to listen to, voice and tone. Everything was happy. Everything was positive. And people like Michaela here, sent us a photo. We had a designer, branded it up, sent it straight back to them. If they wanted, we had a copywriter who could write stuff for them, or we let them let rip. But we gave them a few things that they needed to do. That bit.ly is that website. Everything pointed at that website, right? Nowhere else. Put the hashtag in, point to the website. And many of them actually were really brilliant, and they actually worked with us so that we could time when things happened for maximum carpet bombing impact. So we went into the sort of style and fashion industry. That's Poppy Delevingne, and a very, very brilliant bit of Photoshop, I think, there. That was pretty good, wasn't it? And the whole point of this, and actually this is a technique I learned at Communicate from the brilliant Ed Gillespie and Futera, was to make this look optimistic, positive, youth-facing, right? This isn't doom and gloom. This is save the world. These are, and we said, find a picture of you loving the ocean, and we'll brand it up, and then get ready, because we're all going to get busy. And so this stuff just started, we started generating this very broad range of advocates who were all standing ready. And by the way, to give you an idea of timescale, this entire thing, from me coming up with the idea to landing it the week after Blue Planet 2, 12 weeks. 12 weeks. I wouldn't have done it in 12 weeks. I just only had 12 weeks because we thought it up quite late. So here's Steve Backshall and his Olympic rower, was girlfriend, I think, then, but now wife. And it's all happy, right? This is all really positive. This is a big party where we're saving the world, and why don't you join us? Why don't you join us? Because this makes us feel good. Back the blue belt. It's all positive. Everything about it is positive. So Truin was talking about humour earlier. We worked with Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry said, yeah, I want something completely different, very quirky, and me, it would help if it was funny. So we came up with Save the Bastard Cunning Fish, which is actually a little fish that we found in one of the territories. And actually, Cara Delevingne liked it so much that she's like, can I have it? And we said, no, Stephen has to have it for at least a day, and then you can have it, darling. And the whole idea was that anyone could take part. And it was unfiltered. It wasn't about snazzy. It was about being very real. And we started building up these images where that was you declaring your support, right? And yes, you could be Hugh Fernie Whittingstall, You could be a couple of folk from Newquay, and we went into all the groups that we thought would be interested. The surfers, the sailors, the anglers, all of that lot. They thought this was great. And where did it all lead? Always led there, right? Because that's where the lever was. So what happened? Because it's literally a game of, colour by numbers. How many of them could we get to sign the Blue Belt Charter? Well, what was really interesting is that because we learned that politicians live by their Twitter feeds, and I thought, God, that is amazing. Literally, they rely on them. It defines them. We realised that what we could do is we could actually just put a wedge right down the middle, and then we could have heroes and losers. Simple as that. And if you put your postcode in, and someone hadn't signed the Blue Belt Charter, we suggested ways in which you might persuade them to. And you always start with, I am a constituent of yours. And if you start a communication with an MP saying, I'm a constituent of yours, they are required to take notice. They are required to. So we said, right, whatever you do, do that. Tell them to sign the bloody charter, right? And people started doing this in very, very large numbers. And as we got to the last episode of Blue Planet 2, we had someone using the hashtag every 2.8 seconds. And we had someone using that website to harass their MP every 7.5 seconds. And it went on for 3 days. And we completely terrified Parliament because MPs' Twitter feeds suddenly just filled up with people demanding that they back the Blue Belt. And then if they had signed the charter, we got a little thing every night, went to our web guy, he changed the spreadsheet on the back of the website, and if they had signed it, it went, congratulations, your MP has signed the Blue Belt Charter, why don't you thank them? Right? So they went to hero overnight. And we had MPs clamoring at us going, make this stop. Make this stop. And we said, fine, sign the charter. Go and see Johnny Briggs from Pew Trust. He's over there. Sign the piece of paper and it will all go away by tomorrow morning. And it did. So, cut long story short, we stopped counting when we got 285 MPs, because that's a working majority. Who'd signed up to do this. And then within 3 days of the end of Blue Planet 2, we had the Labour Party declaring that Back the Blue Belt was now a policy choice of their own, and the Conservatives very soon followed suit. So unbelievably, by just harnessing, this is the Blue Planet 2 effect that no one knew about, if you see what I mean. Everyone talks about the plastics. But actually, I still don't have a result. I haven't protected a single square kilometre of ocean, notice, right? So I haven't succeeded yet. So how are we going to then take that, which is a brilliant place to be politically, right? Enormous amounts of support, all 8 major parties, all backing it, 285 MPs who are sworn to do something about it, or else we send the local press at them for not doing what they said they promised they were going to do. So how are we then going to turn that into reality? Because politics works such that, right now is the most amazing example of this. Promise, 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 right? How many billions and billions and billions are being promised right now by the 2 main parties, right? They'll never spend all of that. They haven't even spent the last thing they promised to do. But they know that. They know they make the biggest noise then, and then over time they hope that people forget about it. When it actually comes to signing the dotted line, then can't do that, can't do that, can't do that. So because just making a big noise was not our end game, we carried on. But we then changed the audience action outcome that we needed to do. So in order to get, we'll take Ascension Island, right? So that was the next up. So how are we going to actually get an MPA around Ascension Island? And this was early part of this year. So we knew that one of the arguments would be, the locals will never support it. All right, so let's go for the locals now. Forget Westminster. So we were lucky. We were working in St Helena, which is sort of next door to Ascension Island, which is a relative term, considering they're on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And there, old fishermen from the old men of the sea of Ascension retire, right? So more people live in St. Helena. So we went and filmed them, and we did this baseline shift that got them to muse about how amazing the waters of Ascension were in the old days, right? It was like fisherman's porn, right? Look at the size of that thing, right? And they told stories about there were so many sharks that we could walk between boats on their backs and things like this. I mean, half of it was probably bullshit, but anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, this was the folklore. This was the how it could be. And our message to them was, I should say, they've been used to being saying, "You're on Ascension Island. No, you live in the arse end of nowhere, don't you?" Right? That's all anyone ever said to them. And we said, "You are sitting on the ocean's equivalent of the Garden of Eden, and you know that it was even better once. Let's take it back there. Let's make Ascension great again," kind of, right? And they bought it. So we took that film, and we showed it to the councillors on Ascension, and then we filmed them and their enthusiasm for the MPA, right? They got behind it. We took it back to Westminster, to the people that we'd already worked up through the Blue Belt, and said, "Look at this. The people of Ascension are behind it." And lo and behold, we then got all of those MPs to force Philip Hammond in his spring statement earlier this year to declare a 100% MPA around Ascension Island. 440,000 square kilometres of new marine protected area around a seamount delivered. That's a result, okay? So we carry on because the job isn't done. We've got 4 million, right? We need to get 4 million. So in St. Helena, we are now getting the locals really involved because they've already got an MPA, but we need to get them to really work with it. So we took the fact that these whale sharks appeared every year. We kind of made a spring watch about it. We filmed them in 360 VR because we wanted people we got this concept of meet my ocean. We wanted them to meet their ocean, and we literally took the population of St. Helena diving with whale sharks, right? So that's what we're doing there. And then the last one that will be what happens over the next couple of years is South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. We've got to fight off a hell of a lot of krill fishermen and all the rest of it, but we're going back in, and actually we are helping support a science and filming expedition by the brilliant Ruth Pesey, if you've come across her, who's going down there, leaving on Christmas Day, because we're gathering the assets we need because we're going back into battle in about a year's time. So, audience, action, outcome actually works. Doesn't always work, but it's an interesting way to frame things and stops you making things that make a big noise but have no impact. And so, what is the next plastics moment? They're coming all the time. Right? There was a little albatross that got blown off its nest by 70-mile-an-hour winds about 2 weeks ago, right? Of course, we've got the Australian fires. We've got to start getting on top of these and framing them with our narrative, because otherwise people like this will frame them as they want to, because this is what they're doing. They're jumping on events all the time. And how do we do that? We need to be much, much, much more collaborative. This industry, this sector is set up around a brand and marketing model, which basically says that you lot are in competition with each other for audience. This is nuts. This is absolutely nuts. If there's a war on, the last thing you need is friendly fire, right? So I put it out to you that we need to start gathering around big ideas and moments and working out, right, you lot do that, and we're going to do this together. Here's a rather brilliant image. I have to say, the imagery from XR is rather marvellous. But is this actually a vision of where the sector currently is? Because it is pretty clear that the tide has turned. But are we ready? And are we going to take the next moment and deliver outcomes from it and not just noise? Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Can I ask one question?
Yes.
And then we'll ask John to come up. I think it's just interesting, and we've talked about this at previous communicates about kind of known moments and unknown moments. And I think it's come up before when we're talking about broadcast in particular, about, sometimes broadcast moments are kind of held very close, and it's hard for maybe some in the sector to know what are coming and how well we work at speed to be reactive. And I wonder, from kind of being on both sides, if you wanted to just say something about that.
Yeah, the broadcasters could do a lot more. I mean, the way I set up Springwatch, I know many of you have benefited from this. It was deliberately set up to be a thought-provoking platform that then had a coalition of NGOs around it, all very above board, all very impartial in terms of where the BBC were, and it was just an opportunity. And I've got friends and colleagues here from the British Trust for Ornithology. They're the best. They absolutely saw the opportunity, and they made the most of it. Increasingly, and you heard Johnny Hughes, if any of you were here last night, saying that his frustration is that Netflix are kind of trying to do that kind of brand thing and hold him down, but they're looking more and more to be able to pre-release stuff, because for them this is better, right? You've got to get the partnership thing right, you've got to get some rules of engagement right to protect the broadcaster, protect the rights and everything. And it is more difficult and it takes more time. But I think more and more people are prepared to take that effort now, to make that effort and really seize the opportunity. And then the other thing is, these moments are going to keep coming round and round and round and round. And actually, you can actually have something prepared, right? I didn't have to watch Blue Planet 2 to come up with the Back the Blue Belt idea. That was an idea waiting for its moment. So have your ideas and have them wait for those moments. And those moments may be planned, and that's great, but they may not. Something may just happen. And those moments can be news moments as well.
Yeah.
But this is a different way of working, right? This is different. But like anything, like live telly, which I did for years, like news, it's all in the planning, right? It's not like we rock up on Springwatch, turn the cameras on and just go, hey, let's see what happens. It's all planned. So be ready. This whole idea of be ready.
Yeah.
What are you trying to do? Run those metrics. Who are you trying to reach? What's the target? What are the levers of power you need to pull in order to deliver the outcome in a permanent way, not just make a big noise? Unless you want to just please your mum, which is what a lot of people make media to do, and they just won't admit it. Just make a big noise and have a big number and win a gong. I want to achieve things with media, as I'm sure as any of you in the room will say, you want to do that with your communication. So be ready and be fleet of foot and work together. Yep. There's not enough working together. That partnership was difficult because there were lots of organizations that had international head offices, they had 5-year plans, they had funders who might be a little bit poor old Johnny, because it was Netflix, was told by the new execs that now run Netflix, who are now execs that run behemoths rather than run challenger brands, which is when he started, telling him you can't mention the red meat argument because that would be un-American. Right? So coalitions could work a lot better, and organizations could actually, I like to put it, detach the mission from the money, or detach the mission from the money and the membership. There's this thing. I mean, I work in the BBC, and the amount of people who find it really easy to say no to things because it's like an over-precautionary principle. It's like, whoa, someone might da-da-da-da-da. It's like, really? Are they actually going to? Should we try and see? And if they do, then should we apologize? And that the bigger an organization gets, the more you get people, old power, in the middle, going, just in case, better not. No one knows this. So I think as organizations individually, we can detach the mission from the money and the members. And it's not disingenuous to the members. It's just a different thing. And the organization shouldn't be run on pure business and marketing principles, because it will make them naturally compete with other people in the sector, which is ridiculous, particularly now. And the public would be shocked to think that would be happening, and it's just not right. But also, it makes people very, very wary when they get sufficiently big, because they think there's too much to lose. RSPB, WWF. You know, you look at them, they've just become big brands. And so when you go, come on then, let's go cage fighting in Westminster, right? They go, whoa, no, that might upset this 5-year, 3-year, 2-year, whatever. It's like, okay, so you don't actually want to get anything done. You just want to get bigger as an organization and nick members off, I don't know, the wildlife trusts. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. I want to save the world. It's evident that some people just want to build brands. So I think people should be militant within their organizations to say you can do both, but they are not the same. Don't have marketing people run your campaigns, your mission. Have missionaries running your mission. And then actually you can work together. Like we proved on Springwatch, you can actually all share the same space, and we need to stop arguing about what proportion of the pie we're each going to get, when the real conversation we should be having is, by working together, how can we make the entire pie bigger? Yeah. And if ever there was an opportunity to do that, it's right now, because we won't get an opportunity as good as this.
Brilliant. There's so much we can unpick there, both today and I think in future communicates as well. But I'm going to invite John to the stage to contribute to the conversation. And John is, there's so many people who could have invited to be part of this conversation, but John is from the National Lottery Community Fund. Have I got that right?
Snappy title, eh?
Yeah. Previously maybe known as Big Lottery Fund. And we've asked John to tell us a bit about, from a funder's perspective, how they are looking at some of these issues and looking into the future, and not just to tell you about the kind of grants on offer, but to kind of lift the lid on some of the thinking at lottery as well. So over to you, John.
Good, thank you. Note to self, don't come on after Tim Scoons. So I'm afraid it's probably, this is the case of when you come to a communications conference and you're not actually a professional communicator. So thank you for the intro. As I mentioned, John Rose, National Lottery Community Fund. My day job, I'm actually the director of our organisation in Wales. But my link here is that I'm our senior executive lead on all things environment, which has been a bit of a battle, it's fair to say, over the years. So a little bit about the community fund, just very quickly. So funded by the National Lottery, large percentage of that goes to good causes, where one of those we distribute in the region of about £650 million a year across the UK. Key thing for us, lottery ticket buyers. So why are we now interested, or I suppose more interested in the environment, is the fact that the public are, and the public buy national lottery tickets, and that gives us a kind of license and something we have to bear in mind in what we do. So public opinion is quite key. I would say that we've always been an environmental funder. Over the last 5 years, we've committed around £350 million to environment projects, but often very much through a very community-faced lens, and I'll come on to that shortly. And I was delighted actually earlier to come into one of the earlier sessions with Avon Wildlife Trust and Friends of the Earth, who were talking about schemes they'd funded through the Our Bright Future scheme, which was again one that we'd funded in the past. Just a little bit more about us. So we set out a strategic framework in 2015, the strapline being people in the lead, and I want you to keep that in the back of your mind as we go forward. And there are 2 quotes under that, which I think really encapsulate what we're trying to achieve. And one of them, it just came from a stakeholder event in Newcastle, where someone once said to us, so by people in the lead, what you mean is actually, you want to know is what matters to us, not what's the matter with us. And that was a key thing, because it's through the community's eyes. The other thing we talk about quite a lot is taking a strengths-based approach. Hence the quote there is actually, when we talk to communities, not asking what's wrong, but asking what's strong, and think about how we build on that. So it starts from a position of really quite a positive narrative. So broadly, I would say we call it an environment strategy, but it's 3 things we're looking to do, and this explains how it fits for us as a major funder. And I would say at this point as well, this isn't just about National Lottery Community Fund. The other funders out there are having this conversation at this time, and the focus of ACF, the Association of Charitable Foundations, annual conference last week was all about climate change and what trusts and foundations could do. So there's probably no better point in time than to be talking to funders of all sorts at this point in time around their interest, in particular in climate change. So very broadly, first point, managing our own environmental impact. I won't talk about that, but if you look at the top just very briefly, you'll see that our office emissions, we've put them down 80% over the last 5 years. So actually what was really important to us, and when we spoke to our own colleagues, they wanted us to show that we could actually walk the walk a little bit before we started to look externally. The second point, which I'll come on to in more detail now, is how we support our grant holders to become, if you like, greener. Now, the critical thing for us, we're a funder of people. We primarily fund social purpose, and often with a very, very people-focused lens with that. And then the third element of the strategy, which again I'll come on to later, is about committing an additional £100 million in grant funding, specifically to tackle climate change over the next 10 years. That additional point is really important. I touched upon earlier, we are an environmental funder, so don't just think of this as the only source. Look at all the sources that we have across the country, and there are often opportunities there. So I'm going to touch a little bit on greening our grant holders, and what I want to highlight is this is test and learn. We've only really just begun doing this, and one of the reasons I'm here is because we're testing and learning in Wales, and so we've picked it up. Primary cause is often people-based and socially based towards this webpage is quite difficult. So there's an ongoing sort of, I'll loosely call it campaign, but communications activity to constantly push people back towards this. The piece that I'm really excited about, because I think this has such a potential to change the way that people work, is we're working currently with a cohort of 30 existing grant holders, many of whom, from their perspective, have done very little environmentally in the past, to look at the steps that they can take. Now, to do this, so these are some pictures from the recent launch. To do this, what we've done is we've enlisted some partners initially, so Renew Wales and 7Y Energy Agency. Without going into any great detail, they're broadly support agencies, and in particular Renew are effectively a consortia of voluntary sector organisations, or members of voluntary sector organisations, who have got experience of implementing environmental action themselves and go out and support projects that want to learn to do it. So it's the sector, it's kind of by the sector for the sector, and that's a really sort of powerful way of mentoring. It's not strictly mentoring, it's consultancy, because there's a payment involved, which again generates an income for those organisations. But that's critical in actually giving people an idea about what they can do, but very much not you must do this, very much a menu of options, and they explore what it means for different organisations. 7Y, far more focused around energy, so that's with a distinct energy focus. And then the pound sign at the bottom is the critical thing that we are able to do, is we can give people money. So we're making up to £10,000 available for individuals to take action with that, which obviously is a sweetener, gets people involved. No surprises that when we offered it, we kind of had our hands bitten off for that. But it's really interesting. I think the critical thing for me with this is that this is about learning. So what we are getting from this is a sense of what it means from a community's perspective to get involved in environmental activity. Find out what they're already doing. How do you then celebrate that and build upon what they're doing at that point? So if I think about some of the early learning that's come out of this, I think the critical thing for me is one, it's hard work. I talked about the fact that if you can put a web page up there, but of course you've got to constantly drive material towards it. You've got to keep it up to date. We have a web page for Wales. You couldn't do that for England. You'd have to have a regional one. You'll need to think really sensibly about how you make links to relevant agencies that can provide that support. So pretty intensive in that way. So yeah, that's always a challenge that's there. I think a critical thing has been about engaging with organisations on their terms. One of the great things about Renew Wales, the start of that conversation is about what does this mean to you, and how is your organisation taking environmental action at the moment? What could you do more? And it's very much a sort of soft way in that way, rather than going in and saying, this is what you must do. Now, what we can do is follow up with a bit of an environmental audit, which gives a harder list, but it does give them a good sense of what they could do. I think the other critical thing is recognise, and it's interesting, I've not heard this term used here, although I've heard people talking about it, co-benefits are key. so many of the actions that people can take that do have a positive environmental benefit actually have lots of other benefits, and more of the behaviour change work that's going on is highlighting that co-benefits are critical in terms of explaining to people or supporting people to take further action. So as we go forward, we will take from these case studies and identify those co-benefits and promote those. Support is absolutely critical. I think without Renew Wales and 7Y, it'd be very difficult to do this in terms of helping people make very sort of supported and enabled decisions. One of the great things is you'll come across no-cost options, low-cost options, and higher-cost options. So there's an awful lot of the work that Renew point towards actually doesn't cost anybody anything, but it actually gives them a sense of achievement by getting involved. And then the final point I'd made, constant complexity for us is regulation. And interesting, when we're talking about some of the systems issues that Trewin referred to earlier, you might think, well, why don't you just put solar panels on everybody's roof? But as an arm's length government body, one which is funded with public money, because that's the way national lottery funding is, we come across things like state aid regulations, which are difficult. So it's just being prepared to navigate those. So that's very much, for me, that's a really exciting bit, is thinking about greening our grant holders. And what I'm really passionate about is how can we take that as a funder and think about how we influence those to the people who apply to us every year. We receive about 40,000 applications a year. We make about 12,000 grants. So if we could start to reach into all those community groups, all of whom are trusted, often trusted by the people that they serve, there's a real potential there to touch the public and have a massive impact. Third element of the strategy I referred to is Climate Action Fund. I'm going to kind of whiz through these slides, and they're available afterwards, so you can pick up on these. So we did feel that actually it was really important that the National Lottery made a statement about its commitment to addressing climate change. We haven't declared a climate emergency. We've done what we're probably better at and tried to put some money on the table for this. Now, the critical thing this is £100 million available over the next 10 years. I'm really hoping that we can persuade the board to release a bit more in time, but this is our starting point. Now, the reason, again, I'm saying it's additional is there are lots of other opportunities for people to apply to us. It's not just about this particular fund. And as I'll touch upon quickly, this is just the beginning of it. What I'll describe to you now is effectively the first round. There's a whole host of things that we want to continue to do to think about how we can make a real difference with this money. The critical thing, I think, behind all of it, and linking back to Tim's point and some of the descriptions yesterday, there's a lot going on around awareness. What we hope we can do with National Lottery funding is allow communities to move that into action. So I think that's potentially the sort of catalytic role that we're in a very fortunate position to be in. So what we're looking to do is support communities to make change that they believe will help them to achieve action. Again, critical because it's talking about the language of community and how they see things. Climate Action Fund's looking very much at community-led partnerships, and we're expecting those partnerships to be at least equal and often led by community-based organisations as opposed to environmental organisations. I made reference to Our Bright Future a little bit earlier, and when we put that together, the idea, very loosely, was to crash together the world of youth and environment and try and diversify in that way. And I was so pleased to hear earlier about the effect it's had on Friends of the Earth. And this is kind of what we want to do between, if you like, the environment sector and communities, is actually give people that ownership and to engage with those who currently don't see the environment as a priority, because actually they often see it as a priority but for very different reasons. And the other bit that's key to this right at the bottom is thinking about networking communities, and I've called it there building a movement. And we're working on this because we're not a movement building organisation. As Tim alluded to earlier, as an ex-BBC member, he knows that campaigning is very difficult for people like me as an NDPB. We have to sort of tread quite a fine line there. But that's critical. What failure will look like for us is if we support 15 or 20 great projects individually. What success will look like will be if those projects are networked and if they inspire other communities like them to take action. That's really what this is about. So just very quickly, running through it, open to applications, expressions of interest at this point of time will close in December. We are literally only trying to make 10 or 15 exemplar beacon awards during this first round. Partnership is going to be absolutely critical. And if it's partnerships made up of purely environmental NGOs, I think it's highly unlikely we'll support them. We really want to see unusual partnerships with this, and those that are engaging with communities and engaging with a broader sector that perhaps hasn't happened before. I've heard a number of occasions over these days about the lack of diversity within the environment sector. I think this is a real opportunity to actually look at how that can be diversified. Critical thing is looking, I suppose, at successful applicants are likely to have a sense of plans already there. So that's going to be really important. Other critical bits, place-based. These don't have to cut right the way across the UK. They need to be geographic. Community-led, cross-sector partnerships. Looking at high impact. There are an awful lot of environmental activities that, and this is climate focused, that perhaps aren't sufficiently impacted. So we're really interested in energy, really interested in transport, because transport's a massively underfunded area of work, and consumption and natural environment, meaning things like planting, offsetting those. When I say offsetting, sort of mitigation measures as such. Longer term, we want to see how this impacts longer term sustainable behaviour change. Reach goes back to my point about not the usual suspects, and learning engagement is key. All the projects that are funded through this will be required, if you like, to come together, share that learning network, and actually develop something which is far bigger than the sum of its parts. I'm not going to go right the way through this. I think the key point is the penultimate one, really, is that this is only the first round of funding. This isn't going to commit that first 100 million. It's the dipping of our toe in the water. And there's so much work to think about what might come next. And that gives you just a sense of the size and scale of these awards. I believe all of these are available afterwards. So, and I said, all this information is available on our website. So a couple of reflections and I think provocations as somebody who's been kind of involved in funding in this world for some time. Really critical, and first and last are linked, is engage on the terms of those you seek to work with. So I was at this conference last week. There was a guy there from the Lawrence Western Estate. So I'm Welsh, sorry, so I don't know Bristol well. We're seldom allowed over the bridge. But I understand he talked about his work on the Lawrence Western Estate and very much the fact that they were doing an awful lot which addressed climate change. But they didn't talk to people about addressing climate change. It was about making sure that your home was dry, your home was warm, your kids are fed. And actually it's been almost doing it by stealth in that way. And he gave a fantastic talk actually about how they engaged at that point. So they weren't engaging because they were interested in the environment. It was for a number of different motives. But in starting in that way, now they do talk about climate change. Now they are proud about what they're doing in terms of that. And it gives that community a sense of civic pride. And you know, the guy who was talking to us was clearly interested in the environment, but he was passionate about the place he came from, and the power of place is just incredible. A question that funders like me wrestle with quite a lot. So, to inspire or require, that is the question. You know, we could make actually quite formal requirements if we really wanted to, but I don't know if has anyone here actually administered or benefited from European funding? So I've done both. Yeah, it was like you could see the heads drop actually at that point as well. So particularly European Social Fund has a real nightmare of reporting. And so how much do we layer upon things here? There's a real issue about how do you layer requirements. So I think I don't have the answer to that question. I think it's probably a blend of both, but that's something we're looking at the moment. And the final point, which I think is really critical, is this quote, "Nothing about us without us is for us." The reason that's so critical is that as you go forward, if you're serious about engaging those who don't currently engage, it's absolutely vital that you remember that and see about how you take things forward. And you know, as a funder of lots of different things, it's the organisations that do that best that we tend to find are the most successful. Good. Thank you. We can do, yeah, a stimulation for a few awkward ones to think about.
We've got some slightly awkward questions here, and although we're pretty much out of time, our next thing in the calendar is our coffee break. And I know at the end of the conference it feels a bit strange to sort of still be networking and still going out to chat to people, so we thought a little bit of food for thought for this last coffee break might be quite interesting, because this also leads really, really well into our final keynote speaker for the day, who's going to be talking about social change and social agency. And so we think these are some really great points to kind of get yourself ready for that. Don't miss that session. But very much, thank you very much, John. If you can come up, Tim, we'll give a big thank you to Tim and to John, and we'll pick these questions up over coffee.